All right, we're going to get started in just 1 minute. Let everyone kind of join in here, get settled. Say welcome everyone to the second webinar of today's Jamposium with AMS Weather Band. Glad you could be here today. See some more folks coming in. I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar, Science Communication in Today's Media Landscape, with Jason Semino, Jeff Cornish, Erica Groh, and moderated by Marissa Ferger. Before we begin, I just want to address some quick guidelines for our webinar. If you have questions, that's great. Please submit them in the Q&A button, and we will get to them throughout today's webinar. So feel free to put them in whenever you think of them. And we'll get to them when we can. I'd like to introduce Marissa, our moderator today. Marissa works at the Weather Communications Group at Penn State University, where she produces and forecasts for the show Weather World and teaches courses in weather communications. Thank you so much, Marissa, for being here today.
Thank you, Eric, and thanks for all of you for being here today. We have a great panel on board with us this afternoon to talk about this topic. We have Jason Semino of the Washington Post, Erica Groh from NOAA, and Jeff Cornish from AccuWeather. So Jeff, I'll start with you. If you can just give a quick introduction about your background, why we chose you to do this.
All right. Well, thanks, Marissa. In full transparency, Marissa is one of my several great mentors in my career. I graduated from Penn State in 2004, got into the weather because of my dad and others in my family that were really into the weather. Grew up outside of Philadelphia, and most of us who get into the weather, whether you're a weather enthusiast or a professional meteorologist, there's usually a big storm or two that really influences you. So the 1993 superstorm and then the 96 storm in Philadelphia brought about 30 inches of snow. That was a big one. So I fell in love with the weather and studied at Penn State, graduated in 2004. In my very first job, I thought I might want to do TV, but I looked like I was about 17 when I graduated, so I wasn't hireable yet. So I worked with Penn State, and at that time, we did the New York Times weather page. And that was a really great job. I got to work around great people through osmosis. I learned a lot of things. And then I guess matured enough after 2 years to get a TV job in Joplin, Missouri, worked there for 2 years, Lexington, Kentucky for 4 years, Toledo, Ohio for about 1.5 years. And then I moved internally within that company for a chief job in a smaller market in Erie, PA, where we had spectacular snow and some fun forecast challenges. I've been at AccuWeather for 7 years now, and we have a cable network called the AccuWeather Network. And the past 2 years, I've been the assistant chief for the broadcast department here for the video team. And it's a lot of fun. Typically work Monday to Friday, and I'm on from 4 to 8 p.m.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate you being here. Now we'll move to Erica Groh. Erica, hello.
Hi, Marissa, and hi, everybody. I also am a native Pennsylvanian and a Penn Stater, as you can see with my background here. I was not sold on weather yet when I was growing up. I just knew that I loved science and I loved learning about how and why things work in the natural world. So I didn't gain my focus in meteorology until I arrived at Penn State, and I am one of those Pennsylvanians for whom it was practically stamped on my birth certificate that this is where I'm going to go to school. So the first choice was Penn State, and then the second choice was meteorology. But if I can just quickly tell you about how deep that love for science goes. When I was in first grade, my teacher realized that I needed an outlet for all of this, what's going on in my brain. And so she let me teach space to my class 1 day a week. So I would spend, and at the time, my idol was Sally Ride. That's who I wanted to be when I grew up. So I would learn about the rings around Saturn or the asteroid belt or, you know, something like that. And then I would teach my class about it for about a half hour every Friday. So, you know, I was lucky to have those mentors very early on who recognized that there was a budding scientist going on in there. And when I got to Penn State, I ended up choosing meteorology, and thank goodness I did. It was a great career path for me. I did go into TV from day one when I graduated. My first job was in Midland, Texas, which is where they filmed the movie Friday Night Lights, and then they ended up making a TV series about it. But they were actually filming that movie when I was living out there, so that was funny. After that, I actually made a phone call to my friend and colleague here, Marissa Ferger, who at the time was my former advisor, I guess you could say, at Penn State, and asked her for some advice as to where I could go next. And long story short, that's how I landed my second job, which was in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So what a great opportunity for me to get back close to home. I grew up in the Lehigh Valley, so I went from being a 3-day drive from home to about a 90-minute drive from home, which was fantastic. After that, I went to Philadelphia. I was there for a few years at what people locally call Action News, the ABC station in Philly. I also spent a few years at WUSA in Washington, D.C., and about 4 years at WNBC up in New York City before deciding to hang it up and change career paths. So I took all this knowledge that I gained about weather communication, hazardous weather, how to make sure that the people who are hearing the message get the right message and make the right decision based on that. I took that into this next phase of my career that I'm in right now. I'm currently a public affairs specialist for NOAA's National Weather Service. My portfolio, as we call it, is NCEP. So that's the National Centers of Environmental Prediction. That includes things that you've probably heard of, like the Climate Prediction Center, the Storm Prediction Center, and one that's going to be very prominent this year, the Space Weather Prediction Center, with the peak of the solar cycle imminent. So that's what I'm doing now. I also did briefly get to work with Jeff Cornish. I was very happy to be able to work with him at AccuWeather for about 1.5 years, but that's where I am right now.
All right. Thank you, Erica. And thanks to your first grade teacher for
I
letting
know.
that scientist and you come out.
Yeah, for sure.
That's great. And last but certainly not least, we have Jason Samenow. Hi, Jason.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. And it's a pleasure to be here for this session today. Like Erica and Jeff, I grew up in the Mid-Atlantic, not Philly, but the DC area. And I'm a proud lifelong Washingtonian. I went to, I caught the weather bug like Jeff at a young age, around 10 years old. It was, for me, 1987, so I'm dating myself a little bit. We had back-to-back big snowstorms here in the DC area, shut schools down for about 7 days in a row. That clinched it for me. I was hooked on snowstorms, and then my interests evolved into thunderstorms, hurricanes. And then eventually when I got into college and later in high school, climate change issues. And after I did my undergraduate at the University of Virginia in environmental science, I got a master's degree in atmospheric science at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. When I was done with graduate school, wasn't sure what direction I wanted to go in, whether I wanted to go more into the climate change direction or more into weather forecasting, which was my first love, so to speak, in terms of professional topics. And so I ended up taking my first job out of college at the Environmental Protection Agency, and I was a climate change science analyst, and I did that for about 10 years. But while I was at EPA, because I wanted to stay active in weather forecasting, I started a website for DC weather called capitalweather.com. And we turned that into a blog style website where we would post forecasts a couple times a day. We had a very active user community who would send in their storm reports, ask questions. And I think we were one of the first professional local weather blogs on the internet. And we launched this back in about 2004. The Washington Post took notice of what we were doing. They wanted to expand their DC area weather coverage. So they invited us to be their weather team in 2008. So while I was still at the EPA, I was on the side doing this weather forecasting gig for the Post, and I did that for 3 years on the side. And then in the winter of 2009-2010, that was a Snowmageddon winter here in DC, our snowiest winter on record. Our web traffic went through the roof at the Post, and the Post really saw the value of what we were providing and decided to offer me after that winter a full-time position in the newsroom. So I left my day job at the EPA to go full-time at the Post, and I've been at the Post as its weather editor for the last decade. And I run the Post local weather team called the Capital Weather Gang, which many of you probably heard of. And but we've expanded. Initially, when I started at the Post, we were really focused on for and about Washington, but now the Post views itself as more of a national and international news organization. So our weather coverage spans across all topics and all areas. And so we basically cover everything. So it's a challenge. Our team's expanded, but love my job. So I'll stop there.
That's one thing I think you can say about meteorologists in general. Most meteorologists really love what they do, and the passion really shows. And one thing that I think all of us have heard of, especially in recent years, and more from a complaint department, is about sensationalism, and that every weather system that moves through, meteorologists sensationalize, or maybe the media does, who's at fault. Jason, I'm going to start with you. Tell us your feelings on sensationalism when it comes to the weather.
Sure. So I think one of the challenges we have in the media is that we want people to pay attention. If people don't watch us, if they don't read our content, if they're not engaging, we don't have jobs. So, and of course, we want people, especially when the weather is high impact, we want people to listen to us and take the appropriate actions. And so how the challenge we have is how, when there's so much, there's so many things competing for your audience's attention, how do you get them to read you, to watch you, to listen to you? And so you have to kind of walk a tightrope where you're trying to engage, educate, and inform, but not go over the top. The challenge is that when you sensationalize, when you overpromise and underdeliver, you lose trust. And so you want to hit that sweet spot where you're getting people to watch you, you're getting people to listen to you, but you're also providing useful, trustworthy information. So I think it's, and I think it takes experience, it takes practice, but trying to have a high batting average and hitting the sweet spot in your communications, regardless of the platform you're on, whether you're on social media, whether you're on TV, whether you're writing an article, whether you're writing a headline, you want to try to get that right.
It's tough because on social media, a lot of the algorithms tend to drive things that gain a little bit more traction early in the conversation. And sometimes you might have, an amateur weather blogger, and there are some fantastic amateur weather bloggers out there. Then there are others that really are just motivated by growing their presence. They want the clicks, the likes, the shares, and that can flavor the tone of the general weather discourse in the public. A lot of the time, not everybody is as weather literate as some of the people who are dialed into this today. I go back and forth with some weather enthusiasts online, sometimes late at night, for better or worse. And some are very sharp. Others are easily swayed by the picture they see, even if the headline is about maybe it being a slightly below average winter for snow. Our long range team at AccuWeather forecast that, and some other agencies did. But there were some others who were shouting about how much snow there would be. And even if you took basically a mean of most of the major forecast entities, the Climate Prediction Center, AccuWeather, and perhaps a couple of other major private sector entities, the mean forecast probably was for a less snowy than average winter and slightly milder than average winter, more snow than last year. But there were a lot of headlines, a lot of conversation about how much snow we were going to be seeing this year. It's tough to fight that sometimes.
Jeff, that's a really good segue into a topic that, how can you find reliable people, especially now in the day and age of social media? It used to be anybody could say they're a meteorologist on television. But now it's anybody that can say they're a meteorologist, on Facebook, on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Anyone is an expert on anything these days. And I know the American Meteorological Society, Erica, is working on that. Can you tell us a little bit about their program to help weather enthusiasts find reliable sources on the web?
Sure thing, Marissa. So what I didn't mention when I was, going on and on about how I love being a scientist is that I am also currently the AMS Commissioner on Professional Affairs. So in that role, I oversee all of the professional certification programs. Before taking on this role, I proposed a new certification, so unwittingly giving myself more work, but it's for the greater good, because what we ended up coming up with is what's called the Certified Digital Meteorologist Program for the AMS. So this is hopefully going to help to allow not only the professionals who work in weather but do not actually physically appear on television get something that shows the general public this has the AMS stamp of approval on it. I know my stuff. I went to school for meteorology. My work has been evaluated by a panel of my peers who, deemed it worthy of these high standards that the AMS has set. And then for the end user, the person who is looking at their social media feed or reading a blog post, they can on the other side, they can look at that stamp of approval that the AMS has given this person and say, this is trustworthy content. So moving forward, as people continue to attain this seal, that will be a part of it, is that we will continue to keep an eye on the folks who have been issued this seal to make sure that they are upholding the standards and the code of conduct that the AMS has set forth, and is that clearly codified on their website and in other places. But this CDM board is brand new. It just launched late last year, and actually Jason is one of our board members, and that means that he's been evaluating some of the content that applicants have been sending in an effort to attain their own seal. This program, as it is new, only has 8 seal holders as of today. And there are, I just got word from AMS staff earlier this week, there are 13 more that are in the stage of the process where their work is being evaluated. Dozens more have applied for this seal. So there will be more people coming in the weeks, months, and years to come who will be able to attain this as well. And hopefully that will just help to, clear things up a little bit. It's one step that we can take, Marissa, to help, with the myth busting that a lot of us end up doing, and all of that kind of thing. But at least it's a substantial step that the AMS is taking to help cut through the fray.
Yeah, and if I can just piggyback a little bit.
Yeah, please do.
And just also, adding to some of the things Jeff said. I mean, there is a lot of bad information out there, and it's kind of like a game of whack-a-mole, because it's as soon as, one bad idea or one concept is put out there, and then people who are kind of consider themselves credible scientists, meteorologists, as we try to correct the record and straighten things out, the next, misconception or, set of bad information gets out there. So it's impossible to police all of this. I mean, there are just tons of people in this space who are communicating weather information. So I think all of us who are providing trustworthy information, we just have to do our best to educate our audiences about what a trustworthy weather forecast looks like. I think, obviously the AMS program Erica just described will help identify some of the trusted voices that are out there. But I think the more we can elevate the people and the voices who are trustworthy, the better we'll do at confronting this issue of so many bad sources of information being out there on TikTok and other social media platforms. I think, Jeff raised a good point. There are a lot of people who are amateurs, who are hobbyists, who are doing great work, and we don't want to discourage that at all. In fact, that's the way you get started, is you learn by doing, you practice, you communicate. But I think people have a responsibility to learn from the people who are doing it well to try to implement the best practices. I think sometimes our profession has a little bit of a credibility problem. We hear about, meteorology is the only profession where you can be wrong half the time and keep your job, but we're actually a lot more accurate than that. So I think we just have to do a better job as a community, elevating the voices that are credible and also educating people about the advances in our science and how much meteorology has really advanced over the years and how good our science actually is, because that's a remarkable story and we need to be telling it more. Stop there.
I would just like to add to that, Jason, when that being wrong 50% of the time thing is, how often is the forecast wrong enough so that the decision that you made was the incorrect decision? Practically never. If you are actually paying attention to the forecast, that's the other thing. You have to actually pay attention to the forecast. But I think, Marissa, one of the questions that that we had talked about before this session that we were going to talk about a little bit is, how do we tailor our forecasts in a way that makes sure that people are getting the right message, right? Do percentages work? That little icon on the app, is that enough information? Do you need some text, some verbal, clarification as to what that icon means? That kind of thing too.
I've even caught myself at times, if we're forecasting 4 to 8 inches of snow or 6 to 12, sometimes I'll even say the lower number a little bit louder and a little bit slower, because people are gravitating toward that high number. If you forecast 6 to 12 and you get 6 inches, people are saying, "Where's my foot of snow?" And the forecast verified just as much as, and snow's tough because everybody holds the report card in their backyard. A 1/4 inch of rain versus 3/4 of an inch of rain, it looks really similar. The puddles are still there. You're using your wipers, but snow's tough.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I would add to that is just that, people tend to anchor to the first forecast they hear. And so if you forecast, 3 days out, 6 to 12, but then, the forecast changes, which it invariably will in almost every forecast you make. The forecast, 2 days out and the day before will be different than the forecast 3 days out. But people will only remember the first forecast they hear, irrespective of the source. So that's a challenge you have to confront, and you have to try to train your users to check back, tell them, this forecast could change, keep checking back. And you've got to develop that relationship with your audience so that they know to keep coming back to you. Otherwise, they may hear one thing, anchor to that, and then say, "Oh, well, I thought this much was happening." And then you take a credibility hit. So you've got to keep people plugged in.
We actually have a question from one of our attendees about the new DCM. So with that seal, they wanted to know if you can apply if you only have a BS in geography with GIS, but taken classes in meteorology.
The AMS website has the list of all of the courses that you have to have completed in order to qualify. So you can go to ametsoc.org and click on the professional development tab, and all the information you need is there. And the reason, by the way, that those courses are required is because there is a 100 question multiple choice exam that you have to be able to pass, and the educational requirements are a prerequisite for being able to answer those questions.
And Erica, it looks like Melissa Griffin posted the link to that in the chat. So thank you, Melissa,
Thank you,
for doing
Monica.
that.
Thank you.
We were speaking a little bit about sensationalism before and words, and I was telling the three of you that a few weekends ago, 2 weekends ago, a friend of mine texted me. She was on vacation in Napa, and she said, quote, I didn't pack for an atmospheric river. We have these terms now that are floating out there. It was about 10 years ago, polar vortex was the big word. I want to know your thoughts on these words that really are, something scientific and something that, we talk about, but then they become mainstream. First of all, how does that happen? And then why do people gravitate to these terms?
I was just going to make the comment. I'd rather pack for the Pineapple Express. That sounds better than the atmospheric river. That was the traditional phrase that was used. Jason, I saw you unmuted. I just wanted to interject that.
I'll let you finish with that one.
You're good. No, I mean, I'm going to say in my view, and people differ on this, but I think the weather buzzwords which engage people are net positive because it gets people to pay attention and learn more about our science. I think what we all have to work on within our news organizations is just making sure that the context for those terms is provided so people understand them and don't get scared by certain terms. I mean, the polar vortex can sound scary, and then invariably what can happen too is that, you know, we as scientists can communicate what these terms mean and we can explain them, we can put them in our articles, but then there are other parts of the newsrooms or news organizations which may not have scientists, which will latch onto them and then completely butcher their meaning and use them in headlines the wrong way, like, you know, the polar vortex is coming for you, and that's not how it works. Anyways, I think in general, like, we found that, you know, when we use these terms in headlines, does help. Again, you don't want to misuse them, and you want to make sure you're explaining what they mean and how they're going to impact the forecast. Like that, at the end of the day, you know, you want people to be prepared for what's coming. But I think it's a gateway, it's a way in to your content.
All right, so now I'm going to move into a subject that had some people out in the Western US a little annoyed at those of us in the Eastern US last summer. There tends to be a media bias when it comes to things, especially when it comes to the Northeast. And last summer, a prime example was all the smoke from the Canadian wildfires. And, you know, once it started impacting New York and Philly and DC, you know, it made all the news. But yet in the Western US, that's something that, you know, unfortunately, they typically see, you know, year after year. So why is it that, you know, once it hits, you know, the I-95 corridor in the Northeast, that, you know, that's when these things make the news? Does anybody have any strong feelings on that? Jeff, do you want to start?
Yeah, and I guess I'm going to kind of defend partly why we do put more coverage and more of our emphasis sometimes where our population is. As a cable network, we want to appeal to the greatest number of people at the bulk of the time. There could be a spectacular blizzard in the Kotzebue Sound in Western Alaska. We're probably not going to talk about it. I fell in love with Alaska weather. Never been there yet, but I read a Weather Service discussion for either Fairbanks or Anchorage about once a week in the winter, and it's just amazing what goes on there. But very few people live outside of Anchorage, Juneau, and to some extent Fairbanks. So I know you're talking more about the Western US. When we look at our viewership, we're pretty lopsided. Central time zone, Eastern time zone, and then it drops off significantly in the Pacific time zone with few viewers. And this is just the distribution of population in the US, I think, in the mountain time zone. So we do try to appeal to the greatest number of people. Obviously, there are things that will buck the trend. We're going to put a lot of resources into our coverage of the tremendous snow coming this weekend into the Sierra. But especially when things that are unusual happen, we don't usually see the New York skyline obscured by smoke. We do see that in Fresno or in Sacramento somewhat frequently, or in Salt Lake City. So, you know, unusual things get people talking, and they are going to drive our coverage. With that said, though, we do care about you in North Platte, and we're going to talk about the tornado threat when that happens, or the wildfires near North Platte a few days ago.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I mean, you know, obviously the Washington Post and New York Times are along the East Coast, and AccuWeather's in State College, the Weather Channel's in Atlanta, Fox Weather's in New York City. So, you know, a lot of the major media organizations covering national weather are along the East Coast. But I think, you know, thinking about last summer and the smoke, I mean, that was sort of an unprecedented experience. And I think, you know, the air quality in DC and New York was the worst in the world, I think, over a couple of days. So there were real hazards, and this was sort of a singular, unique event. So I think it justified the coverage that it got. And I will also point out when the same thing happened in San Francisco, which is another big population center. And yes, of course, the media does tend to be population center biased, but you know, there was a ton of coverage when San Francisco had a similar situation with smoke and the skies turning orange and red. All of that, and you know, people, you know, having to wear masks when they were outside. So yeah, I think, you know, like, it's a population center bias, and I think obviously with what happened last summer again, that was pretty unique, and in my view merited the coverage it received.
Okay, we have a couple of questions that have come in. This one is about turn around, don't drown. Angie writes, is there anything more to do about flash flooding and having people turn around so they do not drown? And the rest of the question just disappeared, so I didn't get the second half of it. But Erica, I don't know if you want to jump in on that one about, what messaging we're sending when we say turn around, not drown. And then is air quality being paid attention to more these days?
In a word, yes, for air quality. And for some of the reason that Jeff and Jason talked about is that it's hitting more population centers. The number, both the frequency and the extent of wildfires is increasing, even when you factor in the mitigation efforts that have been taken, and Jeff is our fire expert, so he would be able to speak more to that. But going back to the turnaround, don't drown thing, unfortunately, without like actual robust legislation, I don't know what we can do, because people are inherently optimistic, and I say this all the time, and so people just think it's not going to happen to me. It's the same reason that people who love rock climbing will go rock climbing in the place that says, do not rock climb here. And it's the same reason that, unfortunately, sometimes people will get behind the wheel. Oh, I only live 5 miles away, when they've had one too many. And, maybe most of the time they do make it home safe. And then, unfortunately, that verifies or validates for them that they made the right choice. If you've driven through this neighborhood X thousand number of times before, and this time there's a sign that says that the road is closed, you're like, ah, man, I can make it. It'll be fine. And then for whatever reason, the roadway underneath got compromised by the water because the soil was saturated, or the water is deeper than it was the last time that you went through. And, those are things that you can't know ahead of time before you make that decision to go around the barrier. Turn around, don't drown. I've had a couple, back when I was a TV Met, I had a couple viewers over the years say that they felt like that made light of a very dangerous situation. However, it resonates with people, it sticks in their mind. Sometimes you have to use language that sticks with you, even if it is irritating, because the ends justify the means, the ends being people remember. And unfortunately, the vehicle might sound like a trite phrase, but it gets the point across.
Thank you. We have another question going back to the certifications for the AMS. This was an interesting question from Dave. What about communicating climate change impact information? Is this looked at any differently by the AMS certification process? That's a great question.
So there is perhaps potentially a certification in climate change communication coming from the AMS in the years to come. And I know that it is not like in the same stage of the process that the CDM seal that we've been talking about is, but it has been proposed. So hopefully the AMS staff members who are on this call are not upset with me for saying that out loud, but I really want to see it happen. So maybe by putting it out there and saying that, yes, there are members of the AMS who have proposed this, and there are proactive steps that have been taken to start figuring out how it could work. So the short answer is that yes, there is something coming to that. When it comes to specifically the certified digital meteorologist and the certified broadcast meteorologist, the bank of questions that get asked in the multiple choice exam do include questions around climate change and climate change attribution, but it's not as robust as it would be if you were a climate scientist. The analogy that I always think about, because there are a lot of us in the meteorology community who think, I'm not a climatologist. I should not answer questions about climate change or attribution. The way I think of it is, yeah, you also don't want to ask a cardiologist if that mole is suspicious and diagnose you, but the cardiologist might be able to look at it and say, yeah, maybe you should get that checked out. Like that's kind of our role as operational forecasters, as weather communicators, is to do the communication part, right? Is to make the science more accessible and to defer to the experts and translate what the experts are saying to the broader community whenever possible.
Thank you, Erica. We're going back to air quality. We have a few air quality questions here. One is from Zoe, who is a summer camp counselor. And Zoe says, with all the smoke last summer, it was difficult going outside to do some of the activities with the kids. What is a way to explain to the kids why they can't be outside without scaring them? That's an interesting question.
I like that. This is a good question. Really good. I have kids. Our kids are 10 and soon to be 13. And it's important not to breed fear, whether you're doing tornado coverage or talking about something like air quality issues. I would encourage you to look at a little bit of the history, and sometimes relating history to kids. And I'm kind of taking this at a slightly different angle, but we've had horrible air quality in the Northeast before. And in the 1800s, our nation's deadliest wildfire led to tremendous amounts of smoke in places like Michigan and Wisconsin, the Great Peshtigo Fire. I think just mentioning that sometimes when this happens, as opposed to we've never seen this before, the sky is entirely falling and there is no hope. I did an interview when I was in local TV with the health department in the city of Toledo, and they were telling me that air quality is, for low-level air quality, it's better than it was in the 70s. And sometimes it almost seems like it's politically incorrect to say, hey, something's improving here, because that can be demotivating. If everything's fine, then nobody takes action. No one cares about carbon emissions or air quality or anything. But we're more aware of the danger of this than we ever have been in the past. So some of the statistics may look different if we fully attributed maybe respiratory illnesses and deaths in the 70s or 60s or in the 1870s or the 1880s, to the actual cause. We know more about that now than before. So I think, I'm a big fan of being transparent and honest with kids when you can, and just mentioning that sometimes when this happens, it's just safer to stay inside.
Thank you, Jeff. We have another air quality question about air quality monitors, such as Purple Air. Has that increased the awareness of air quality? Do any of you have any knowledge of that?
Yeah, that's a website which I believe provides air quality information about locations all over the world. And I think it is helpful. It's helpful as a reporting tool for us in the media. It's also helpful for the general public just to understand, how your air quality compares to other places, and, obviously how significant the air pollution is and what actions you should take. So I think that the Purple Air site is a good tool in the toolbox. And I think the more we can get information like that out there, and for people to understand, the various levels of air pollution and what risk that indicates, based on, based on the situation and based on any pre-existing health conditions people might have, that information's power.
Okay, thank you, Jason.
Sure.
We're switching gears now, and Curtis is asking a question about the media, and he's saying especially national TV networks and how they're constantly relating any storm threat to the impact that it will have on the number of people, when in actual the reality is that it's going to affect a much smaller area. Isn't this overreaching storm impact and diluting actual effects that will result from a storm system, sort of like crying wolf? One thing,
like,
Curtis, I'll say to Curtis that one interesting thing is that some of that actually comes down from when watches, and even before watches and warnings are issued, that information is listed on National Weather Service websites. The SPC, when they have a marginal risk, it will tell you how many people are within that risk, or, I don't know which one of you would like to go into more of this, but
I could take a stab just because I'm employed in that industry, and I guess I'm culpable for some of what happens. And there are some broadcast meteorologists who are joining us. I saw Stephen Glazier and some others among the attendees list. Amanda Reynolds as well, who has been in that industry in the past. The producers love those statistics. It's a great way to start a show, and sometimes producers think a little bit differently than meteorologists. I don't disagree with the use of some of those numbers sometimes, but I don't think it should be the emphasis. And to your point, if we say 50 million people will be affected by severe weather with this event, that is very different from 50 million people may be affected by severe weather in this event, because as we know, the nature of convective weather events, it's a small minority of the people in the area, even in an enhanced risk, or we have a different phrasing at AccuWeather that is slightly at odds with the Storm Prediction Center. We use the phrase moderate a little bit at a lower threshold than the Storm Prediction Center. If we say there's a moderate risk, 2 out of 4 on our own company's scale of severe weather risk, not everybody in that area is going to see a severe thunderstorm, but you might be within 30 miles of a severe thunderstorm at some point during that day. So I agree, it is kind of nuanced, but it's important for us. It's on my shoulders to be responsible and say, 50 million people may be at risk, instead of we'll see damaging winds, tornadoes, and that kind of thing. And you're right, we need to move past that number, because that could be an attention-getting thing that I don't have a hard time with. Although it may not be my first selection as to how to phrase things as a meteorologist, not a news producer. But we need to move on to the potential impacts before getting lost in just that attention-getting number.
Yeah, I totally agree with Jeff. And I would just add, I think, as someone who sometimes does this in the stories that I either write or edit, I think, when you're writing for a national audience, and you're going to have readers in one part of the country wanting to learn about a storm in another part of the country, that number in terms of the number of people potentially affected helps provide some perspective. Like, if the Weather Service has issued a winter storm warning for 90 million people in the Western United States or something like that, I mean, that tells you it's going to be a big storm affecting a lot of people. And I think that's useful to communicate. Now, I totally agree with Jeff. The real focus has to be, okay, well, what are the impacts? Where, when is the storm starting and stopping? When are the worst conditions going to be? What do people need to do to prepare? I think those are the more important things, but I think it's just like as a starting point to give people a sense as to how big an event this is and how sweeping it is. I think it's not a bad thing to include. And we see that feedback because I read the comments in our stories sometimes, and people complain about the fact we mention how many people are included in a watch area or a warning area, but I think it does provide perspective, and I think a lot of people do find that valuable in terms of giving a sense of the scope.
I love the NWS tornado feed that the National Weather Service has put out. It's an automatic feed whenever a convective warning is issued. You can follow NWS tornado, and it has the number of people, number of schools, and the number of hospitals in every polygon. It's very exciting when there's one person. Sometimes you get one person to live in one of these polygons, which is less common than 0 in parts of Wyoming. But it helps with our decision-making sometimes when we're trying to allocate our resources. What warning should we talk about the most?
I want to stick with impacts here for a moment. I know the National Weather Service in the last few years have really been pushing impacts as far as when they put out statements. And I know as meteorologists, we're trying to communicate that more, what's more important, saying that there's going to be 4 to 8 inches of snow, or that, your travel to work or school in the morning could be compromised by the snow that's falling because of the timing. I'd like to hear from you guys about what you've been doing to talk more about impacts versus, the numbers.
It is absolutely more important because 4 to 8 inches of snow that falls from midnight to 6 a.m. is not going to be as impactful as 4 to 8 inches of snow that falls from 6 a.m. till noon. So, that's a very duh way of putting it, but seriously, that's why it's one of the reasons that the impact has become much more the focus. One of the other reasons is because our forecasts have gotten good enough that we can actually deliver impact-based information. When I was a child, the forecasts weren't good enough. Our models have improved, and both as far as the spatial resolution, the temporal resolution, and also the accuracy of them. It was the devastating dual tornado outbreaks of 2011, one of which was in the Joplin, Missouri area. The other one, I believe, Tuscaloosa. Is that correct, guys? Yeah. They were the driving force behind what the National Weather Service now calls IDSS, because we love acronyms, Impact-Based Decision Support Services. That program did not exist when Jeff, Jason, and I first started our careers as meteorologists. IDSS is designed to not only put the focus of the weather messaging on impacts, but also to better liaise with stakeholders, such as emergency managers, to make sure that they're making the right decisions. And in that process of technology improving and forecasting improving, the people that I work with every day now in my job at the Weather Service are spending less of their time crunching the numbers and more of their time delivering services to the people who need them. And it has netted more resilience in the communities that we serve. And an argument could be made that it's helping in the main mission of the Weather Service, which is to protect lives and property.
You, Erica?
I could add a few things here. That's a great perspective, Erica. I think, numbers can be misleading sometimes, and I want to provide an example. And Erica, you may have been forecasting at WUSA at this time, but in 2016, DC had a huge blizzard. It was, January that year, about 2 feet fell, but 2 nights before the blizzard.
I was in New York by then.
Oh, you were? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, in any event, 2 nights
record breaker
before
for Manhattan too.
Yeah, you guys got hit up there big time, I know. But 2 nights before that blizzard, there was an inch of snow that fell in DC at rush hour, which wasn't well forecast. It's just an inch. Arguably, that 1 inch was more impactful than the 2 feet that fell 2 days later. Cars were stranded for hours. The roads hadn't been pre-treated, so they became ice skating rinks. It was a light snow. It fell gradually, but just at the wrong time, and it froze on contact. I think, road temperatures were in the 20s. And so, yeah, I mean, it's all about the impacts. I mean, honestly, like as forecasters, that's what you should lead with. I mean, you should lead with, the timing, because that really matters. And with snow, like, is the snow going to stick? Is it going to make roads slick? Of course, there's been a ton of conversation about Saffir-Simpson scale and whether that's a potentially misleading tool during hurricanes. And it can be, because, sometimes you might have a Category 1 storm like Florence, which hit North Carolina. I forget what the year, but it dumped, tremendous rainfall, and the rainfall was, far higher impact than you might expect if you're hearing it's only a Category 1 storm. And then you might have a Category 3 storm, which might not have as much of an impact because maybe the winds are strong and a very small core around the eye of the storm, but it's fast moving. It affects a small area, whereas you can have a huge Category 1, which unloads, 3 feet of rain. So you do really need to focus. You need to lead with the impacts. I mean, you can use the scales, you can use the numbers as supporting information. I think, people understand that, if you have a Category 5 hurricane, that means the winds are going to be really strong. And if that's the case, you need to communicate that too. But you need to look across all hazards. You need to communicate all hazards and lead with what's going to affect people the most.
If I could piggyback off of that, Jason, I had a graphic kind of set aside here to talk just about that. Our team at AccuWeather has done a lot of research on impacts and just to what you were saying. If you objectively take the Saffir-Simpson scale, tropical storm Simpson scale, but it was a tremendously deadly in it was sorry, I got a message saying that Zoom quit, but I think we're still alive here on Zoom. Good, that's good. Yeah, tropical storm Allison would have been a 0 on the Saffir-Simpson scale, but obviously tremendous impacts. It led to, I think, around 40 deaths in Houston. So we created this AccuWeather real impact scale for hurricanes. And unlike the Saffir-Simpson scale, which we'll still mention on the air, that is an instantaneous characterization of the max sustained winds. Our scale, in a perfect forecast, will come up with one number for the storm's impact because of its wind and or flooding, storm surge, and economic damage or loss. And this will be a little bit of a population sensitive thing. If you have a powerhouse storm slam into the Eastern Canadian Maritimes, or one that moves right into Miami, you're going to have a much different impact, even though the objective intensity of the storm may look kind of similar. So this is just something that we're doing, and we'll talk about the Saffir-Simpson scale, but also we do use the AccuWeather Real Impact Scale for hurricanes.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. All right, we have a couple more questions that have floated in here. One that deals with ensemble forecasting and communicating best and worst case scenarios. So Michelle wrote, how do you feel about communicating precipitation amounts with worst case scenarios, meaning higher of the 10% ensemble, and best case scenarios, along with the likely amount? Do you think communicating probability forecasting like that would be helpful or more confusing to the public? Are any of you doing that right now?
I'll take this real quick. I mean, we've been doing this a long time at Capital Weather Gang with snowstorms, in that we produce a snowfall map, and we'll communicate on that map what's most likely. But we've also developed what we call boom and bust scenarios. The boom scenario being, what's the likelihood that the snowfall is going to exceed the most likely forecast. The bust scenario being, what's the chance that the snowstorm will be less than what we see our most likely forecast is. And, initially when we started to do this, some people viewed it as a cop-out because you can never be wrong if you, provide sort of the full spectrum of possibilities. But we found that over time, people appreciate it. It helps people understand the full range of possibilities so they can better plan, and they're not caught off guard if, understanding that weather is not a perfect science, even though we made a ton of progress. So I think I think for high impact events, which really matter, and for which there's a significant degree of uncertainty, I think you have a responsibility to communicate that and for people to understand. It's not about nailing the forecast on the nose. I mean, I think there's been too much emphasis in our community put on that. I think that's changing because I think a lot more people are doing probabilistic forecasting now. But I think your job as a communicator is to make people understand what the range of possibilities is, not be so concerned about nailing an individual number, which isn't that meaningful anyway, on the nose. Stop there.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple more questions here. One from Carrie saying, how can broadcast and digital nets, or even weather enthusiasts and hobbyists, propel more weather education through the media to the general public? Advisory levels, the difference between watches and warnings, precipitation chances, severe weather, general meteorological terms. These all seem to be difficult for the general public to understand. And Carrie, I'll agree with you on that one.
Yeah, and I think that social media really helps to open that up, because if you only have 2.5 minutes to deliver a weather forecast, you may not have time for some of that educational opportunity. Now, when I was a broadcast met, I always seized on the, quote unquote, boring weather days as opportunities to put that kind of material in. But yeah, certainly social media should be used in that way. And that's one of the things that we're looking for when we're assessing both broadcast and digital meteorologists. I think that one of the things that's great about the way that the business has evolved since I got into it, 20 plus years ago, is that since so many people still turn to the news for the weather, and it is, universally tested as the #1 reason that people tune in to their local newscast, the time that you have on the air is usually not going to get cut. So, you can utilize that time to its best advantage. And really, I would recommend that any broadcast met takes advantage of that time that they're granted to prove to their bosses why their time slot matters by giving that sort of educational content and building trust with their viewers in that way. I think it behooves them to do that, I guess.
I think obviously when you have, I think of course, like quiet weather days is a good time to do that. But sometimes you've got to do it when people are paying most attention, and that's on the high impact days. And so it's especially tough then because you're so busy, right? I think that those are maybe the best times to get people, is when they're actually tuned in and they're not so distracted by everything else. And, the days you're under a severe thunderstorm watch to, educate people what that means versus a warning and so forth. I mean, it can be harder, but taking that extra minute or two to, put out a quick explainer on social media or wrapping it into an article or a blog post, a little bit of an explanatory context box or something like that, that can go a long way.
And it's a good reminder for us. About 70% of what we do involves a map in some form, whether you're looking at model data or creating a graphic to present on the air. It's easy to forget that a lot of people, and this is not a slam on anybody, but a lot of people don't know where they live on a map. People have other priorities in life, and life is difficult sometimes. And looking at local geography, if you live in a state where every county is the shape of a box, that can be tough. So we need to check ourselves and make sure we don't assume too much. And we do have some full screen graphics that have, this is what a tornado watch means. This is what a warning means. There are those great metaphors people have on social media with the ingredients to the taco and then the assembled taco. And it is a good reminder that we need to show those graphics, take the time, even though they seem old. We haven't, it might be a graphic we haven't touched in 2 years in terms of making it, and we only show it once a month, but the average viewer is not tuned in the last time we showed it, so we do need to use it more frequently.
Okay, we have a few more questions here. From Edward, do you see AI as becoming a threat or support tool in weather communication?
Support tool.
Support tool.
Yeah, support tool. Because anytime that it's utilized to reduce what I might call busy work, gives us more time to spend on the things that, as of today, only a human can do.
Yeah, I think there's always going to be the need for a human connection, and if you could have a digital version, a representation of Jason Same now, but one of the people who you interact with, they want to talk to you. They don't want to talk to some bot. But I agree, we're increasingly using it at AccuWeather as well, and I need to I haven't integrated it into my own personal workflow as much as some. But I was reading a meteorologist's comment on a Facebook group, and some people are really leveraging it in their own workflow in a big way to produce tailor-made forecasts to each county in their coverage area, so people can get just what they want. And they still need to make sure what their output is delivering is accurate, but it's reducing a lot of work for people.
Okay, and Jessica asks, should busy weather days have more time allotted on the news to improve education during events that are more hazardous? Jeff, do you want to?
Absolutely, and most news producers are not going to fight you on more time if you ask for that, and you're a local TV meteorologist. Those are the days when I think most people are aware, those are the news drivers these days.
Okay, and question from Doug. This one is a little bit of a longer one. Any thoughts on how the enterprise conveys and sometimes misleads the level of precision, providing snow totals to 1/10 of an inch or rain to 100th of an inch? Is there value in science communication to retain that level of precision, even if it's not scientifically supported?
I mean, I want to do that. I mean, you're not going to tell people expect 1.11 inches of snow tonight when you can't even measure that with a ruler with any degree of accuracy. So, no, I mean, again, that's it. It speaks again to the sort of lack of value in putting a lot of emphasis on numbers. And I think, again, you want to give ranges, you want to use full numbers. I mean, you can use half inches or quarter inches if you need to, but you want the information you're providing to be relatable and understandable to people. If you tell someone, they're going to see 2.634 inches of rain tonight, that's kind of meaningless.
On the air,
sorry, and I was just going to say it kind of overemphasizes, the degree of accuracy and precision we have as scientists.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jason. On the air, we always use ranges. And in most cases, if a TV meteorologist is using something with automatically generated rainfall to the 100th of an inch, it's probably not even their forecast. It's probably a model-driven output, which can be a cop-out, you could say. But there are situations when I've used that in local TV in the past for a low-impact event because it does tell the story. But for a significant event, I think we got to use ranges and make our own forecasts.
Okay, well, it looks like we are nearing 2:15. I just want to make sure that the AMS is okay with us wrapping things up here. There is another session coming up right after this at 2:30. For more information, it's about attribution science and climate change. And then 3 more webinars tomorrow. I wanted to thank, first of all, the attendees today and for being so proactive with all the questions that you had to ask. And a huge thank you to Jason, Jeff, and Erica for taking time out of their busy schedules to be here with us this afternoon.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you for the invite.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Appreciate everyone's questions.
Yeah.